My name is Gordon Rattray. I became a member of the Masonic organization in 1978. It was interesting because I saw men that I knew going to the Legion for a drink, and they had tuxedos on. So one of the men, brother, now I call him brother, Linkletter, Morris Linkletter, I spoke to him, I said, "What are you guys coming from all dressed up like that? What's going on?" And his remark to me was, "Well, let me tell you." And it wasn't long after that that I had an application to join Masonry. So I joined it was February of 1978, which itself is an interesting thing because something happened I wasn't aware of. First of all, we had a huge snowstorm in that February, and they had to cancel the meeting. And they called me up and said, "We're going to do this tomorrow." I said, "Fine." But later on, I found out that 4 of them, of the top Masons, they went to lodge, opened lodge, and went to recess, and left the lodge at recess until the next day, which did generate in higher circles a little bit of controversy about whether they should have left it at recess for a full day while no one was there. But I got my 3 degrees, and that was February. March, April, I had my 3rd degree, and in May, I sat in an officer's chair. And I have sat in an officer's chair through the rest of my career, I think. I became master of the lodge in 1984. So that was a fairly fast movement through the chairs, but that's the way it went sometimes at that time. And then in 1989, Most Worshipful Brother Hollett asked me if I would be Grand Historian for the Grand Lodge. So I think the reason they asked me was I was already deeply into the history of Howard Lodge. I had access to all of our minute books right back to 1855, and that culminated in me writing a full history of Howard Lodge. So I became the Grand Historian in 1989, which put me on the Board of General Purposes. That position at first was an observer for a year or 2, and then I became a permanent member of the board and a voting member of the board. And for the next 10 years, I did the Grand Historian work, and at the same time, I functioned on 7 of the major committees of Grand Lodge. A couple of those committees, I was the first non-Grand Master to be appointed to those committees. And so then, in 1999, I ran for the office of Senior Grand Warden. So I left the historian and became the Grand Warden, and that was my first elected position. I think there were 3 running for the office that year. At that time, the office of Deputy Grand Master was kind of crowded because we had 1 deputy every year. So it wasn't till 2002 that the door opened for me to run for Deputy Grand Master. So in 2002, I ran as Deputy Grand Master. I would have been the 2nd Deputy Grand Master for Most Worshipful Brother Hitchcock. And I was the last Deputy Grand Master that had only a 1-year term. In fact, it was during my term as Grand Master, which I was elected to, that the rule was changed, because up until then it was not a written rule, but it was a considered rule that you only ran 1 year as deputy. So we had a pool of deputies that was maintained, because only half could achieve Grand Master. And in fact, another brother Mike Swettenham, had done the work that made him probably a Grand Master. And he was ahead of me in the line, and I went to Mike and I said to Brother Swettenham, "Are you running for Grand Master?" Because I said, if you are, one, you're a shoo-in, and two, you're in the same district, I would not run against you. He said, I have family situations which preclude me being a candidate. So at which point, that would be in late summer, I let it be known that I would be running for Grand Master. And was elected in June of 2003 and re-elected in 2004. So I was Grand Master until May of 2005. So I had, most worshipful brother now, Wayne McKay, as my deputy. I was the first Grand Master to have the same deputy for the 2 years that I was in the office. I'm not sure if that made much difference. I was ready to be Grand Master. I'd been through so much committee work, and I'd done the work and learned what was going on with the Grand Lodge. So the day I was installed, I had all my committees together. And it's interesting that of my district deputies that I appointed, 3 have gone on. Bill Covell, who is now Grand Secretary, was one of my district deputies. Miles Graham, who is a past Grand Master, was one of my district deputies. And Laurie Bishop, who is this year running for Grand Master, was one of my district deputies. So 3 out of my 7 district deputies have achieved higher offices. My Grand Secretary was Ralph Andrews. Ralph had a number of years as Grand Secretary and was very proficient at the job, so I had no reason to interfere with the way he was running his office, and I went out and did my thing and he did his thing. To me, I didn't have to tell him what to do. Robert Kierstead was the Grand Treasurer. He just passed here a year or 2 ago. The longevity of those senior offices means a lot, because there's knowledge that they've acquired that isn't really written down anyplace. And sometimes in later years we've changed these offices, not because just because the men that had those offices didn't want to stay for long periods. And there are things that aren't recorded that don't get done now because they weren't aware of them. Okay? I still get calls from Grand Secretaries. What do we do in this situation? When I was there, Brother Ralph knew it. Now, besides masonry, I've been quite a bit involved in community affairs. I came to Hillsborough, where I still live, in 1970. Fresh graduate out of Mount Allison University. I acquired my Bachelor of Science degree and my Bachelor of Education degree. And I got married that summer and then started work in Hillsborough in 1970 as a biology and math specialist, and later on I became their computer specialist. Self-taught, but that was right at the front end of computer work. I also joined and became president of the Kiwanis Club. I attended with the local Legion as an associate member, my father having been a veteran of the Second World War, and I was actually the first non-veteran in New Brunswick to have an office of treasurer in the branch for a number of years. Went on to help organize the St. John Ambulance Division in Hillsborough. At that time, the province was promoting St. John Ambulance. They were actually underwriting them to put ambulance service into rural communities. Up until then, it was usually the undertaker with a station wagon that did that work. And so in '74, we organized an ambulance division, and I was elected by the members as the head of it. And later on, I became an instructor, and I trained people to become ambulance attendants. And from there, I went on to municipal affairs. I became a councillor in the village of Hillsborough. And then in the late late 70s, I became mayor. I was mayor for several years. In fact, I was mayor through the time when the Canadian Gypsum Company collapsed during the recession in the early 80s, and that they closed the plant. That was the main employer in the village, so there was a lot of turmoil that I faced while I was mayor. I think we got to stop for a second here. If I catch up to where I want to be, or where you want me to be. Okay, now as I was in my early career, besides Morris Linkletter, brothers that were influential on me were Elvin Woodworth. In fact, Elvin was killed in a car accident on his way back from a lodge meeting in Dorchester. There were two brothers in the car, and they had a head-on collision. We lost them both. So Morris, and then Don Wright of Stony Creek. Don was a man who, that if he was sitting in the room and a lecture was needed, he could stand up and give it. He just needed 30 seconds notice. And those men were travelers. And us young masons of the day, we'd get a phone call. What are you doing tonight? Well, I think you better come to Port Elgin with us, or wherever it happened to be that night. Being a young man with a young family, you couldn't go to all of it. But they were certainly available, and they wanted you to go. Yeah. And we did as much as we could in those days of the traveling. When I was on the road as Grand Master, my director of ceremonies was Ray Jodry, and he was here in Moncton. So it was convenient. He traveled with me all the time, all over the province. We attended every lodge in the province over our 2 years. And at that time, there were nearly 50 lodges. Then other people that traveled with me a lot was Ron Oakley. He got to be Junior Grand Warden. A friend of ours from Riverside, Albert, by the name of Charlie Stewart. By then, that lodge had joined Hillsborough Lodge, and Charlie loved to travel. And if you ever knew Charlie, he could tell stories all the way to Edmundston and all the way back and not repeat himself. So he was an entertainer in the car. And Brother Alan Woodworth, who was the son of Elvin Woodworth, I spoke about a minute ago, he traveled with me quite a few times. But Ray Jodry and Ron Oakley traveled a lot. And they were comfortable in one way in that I usually like to drive to my meetings. But by the time my meeting got done, I was tired. And I could drive in the car with either one of those men and sleep. Because Ray had been trained as an RCMP constable, so he had that training, and Ron Oakley was a professional driver, so they both were comfortable to be with while they drove. You can't say that about everybody. Now, during my term of office, besides the change in the Deputy Grand Master, I instituted the Grand Master's Award. I wanted that, and it was being done in some other jurisdictions. So I had gotten a team together, and we made it up, and it's been running ever since. Yeah. And it was the same thing with the installation program for the Grand Master and the Grand Lodge. Up until my time, it was kind of helter-skelter. They organized in the back corner of the lodge. So I said, let's move into the red room, organize, then march in, and I want the piper to march us in. And that's been done ever since. It's got a little bit more class to it than just organize everybody in the back corner and the hoorah that goes with all that. The probably is at this time that's, I guess at all of our times, we're always concerned about membership levels and declining membership. And we'd gone through a period where there was quite demands being applied to local lodges to do training programs. Like the officers go to training programs. And I didn't see that was going anyplace. So I switched that more to a local education program instead of a provincial-wide thing where you wanted everybody to go to Fredericton to sit in the meeting and learn how to do something. Because you train this guy this year, but next year he's gone. And all the training's gone. And I think probably we're still seeing a certain amount of emphasis by subsequent Grand Masters to have the training local and try to build that expertise within your lodge so that when the master changes, there's somebody else in the lodge that's already got that knowledge. Because I think that's the only salvation for interest in a lodge. Have something for everybody to do, but don't forget about your history. And I do think that time is starting to show that a number of men, I guess, have kind of gotten disillusioned with some of the mainline masonry, and we do see a trend towards some specialized lodges. And I'm not sure that that's the direction to be going in. We're into our third round of it right now. When I was Deputy Grand Master, they had the Bunting Lodge of Research, and they worked under dispensation for a couple of years, but they were never consecrated. They dissolved. So I don't know. I think that we're too small to have branches. That we need to concentrate on the main line. So that's pretty well me.
You're a photographer and a birder?
As a hobby, I have always been a naturalist. I took biology as my major. I grew up on a small country farm in Carleton County. 7 siblings, so you had to entertain yourself. I lived on the land, so I've always carried an appreciation for nature. And I used to take my students on field trips so they would get exposed to nature around Albert County. And once I retired, actually, I retired in 2002 from 32 years of teaching high school, which gave me some time to then move into the venue of the bird watching. And at university, I was into photography. I was the photographer at Mount Allison University for the yearbook. I was main photographer for the newspaper. So I was doing a lot of that. I had my own dark room, and I was doing the whole thing in photography there. Bought my first camera when I was at Mount A, a 35 millimeter. Everything manual on it, so you had to learn in order to get pictures. Then I went into the digital age, and with my bird watching, I morphed into taking pictures of the birds. And I have quite a library now of the birds in New Brunswick. The Nature Moncton, which is a nature group here in the city, I joined that. I'm past president of that. And I'm out regularly with them. Last week I was a speaker for a bird group in Riverside, Albert. Next weekend we're doing a tour of the Northumberland Strait for seabirds. But to me that's really interesting. It's fun. And for a hobby, it's one where you can take your own camera and you go out by yourself and commune with nature. You don't have to be a group.
Did you meet any Masons who were also photographers?
Not really. That I have not gotten too involved with Masons that were photographers. It's strange.
Have they asked you to present your work at Masonic meetings?
No.
Would you be willing to do that?
Well, yes, I suppose I would be if that was what I wanted. A couple of years ago, I did a series on a Facebook page in Albert County, and I did probably 70 over a few months. I would get 1 or 2 pictures a week up of local scenery, and that was well received. Well received. A member of the Eastern Star, and one of the worthy matrons asked me to follow her for a year, doing pictures of all of her meetings, which I did, all over the province, well, out of the province too.
Who was that?
That was Judy Donnelly. She's based out of the Miramichi area.
So does your hobby take up a lot of your time now, or?
My hobby work is starting to morph. I'm really getting into I'm a woodworking person, and I have a woodworking shop, and right now I'm starting to push myself into lathe work. I took a class just after Christmas from a master wood turner, and I'm now working on my skills to produce wood turned objects, from bowls to pens to candlestick holders. So that's starting to take up my hobby time.
And your wife, is she associated in Masonry at all?
My wife is an Eastern Star member. She's been through the East several times. I'm on my 5th trip to the East in Eastern Star. She's been in several grand chapter offices, appointed offices, and she's also a member of the Daughters of the Nile, which she very much enjoys. She's quite involved with them.
So are they related to the shrine?
They are the ladies of the shrine.
So are you a Shriner?
I'm a past Shriner. I did join the shrine. I joined